My son sat me down in the living room my late wife and I built, handed me a brochure for a dreary retirement home, and told me it was time to sell. He's currently in the front yard with a developer, finalizing the deal to demolish my life's work, but he is completely unaware that I made one phone call 6 weeks ago that made this house untouchable. The Historical Preservation Society is arriving any minute. Before we dive into this intense story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We'd also love to know where you're all tuning in from. Let us know in the comments. The brochure landed on the polished surface of the coffee table with a soft, insulting thud. It lay there between us, a glossy rectangle of beige and muted greens promising a life of simplified comfort. The cover featured a stock photo of two seniors, silver-haired and smiling with a vacant, sanitized joy, playing a game of checkers in a room that looked more like a hospital waiting area than a home. The name of the facility was printed in a gentle, looping font, Golden Sunset Meadows. It sounded less like a residence and more like a place where things went to be forgotten. "Dad, we need to be realistic," Mark said, his voice laced with the kind of strained patience one uses on a difficult child. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expensive watch glinting under the soft lamplight. He was the picture of modern success, sharp suit, sharper haircut, and an aura of relentless forward momentum. He looked completely out of place in this room, a room filled with the gentle ghosts of history, of worn leather-bound books and the faint, lingering scent of my late wife Aliner's lemon polish. I didn't pick up the brochure. I stared at it, at the cheerful facade that did nothing to hide the sterile emptiness it represented. My heart, a tired old engine that had been running rough since Aliner's passing 2 years ago, gave a painful lurch. It wasn't the idea of growing older that hurt. It was the clinical, dismissive way my own son was trying to package and dispose of my life. "Realistic about what, Mark?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. The silence in the house, once a comfortable companion, now felt heavy, amplifying the chasm that had opened between us. "About this place," he said, gesturing vaguely at the room around him. His eyes swept over the hand-carved mantelpiece we'd salvaged from a 19th-century schoolhouse, the bay window where Aliner used to read, the faded pencil marks on the doorframe charting his own height as a boy. His gaze held no nostalgia, only calculation. "It's too much for you. The upkeep, the stairs, the garden, it's a burden. Jessica and I, we worry." The mention of his wife's name was like a small, sharp stone flicked against a window pane. Jessica, she worried, all right. She worried that this house, this beautiful, sprawling piece of our family's soul, was a stagnant asset, an untapped line of credit. I could almost hear her carefully coached words behind Mark's. "It's for his own good. He needs a community. Think of the freedom he'll have. The freedom of a single room and 3 scheduled meals a day." "I see," I said, my gaze finally lifting from the brochure to meet his. I saw my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike on the lawn just outside, the teenager I had consoled after his first heartbreak, right on this very sofa. But the man before me was a stranger, his eyes reflecting a cool, transactional ambition I didn't recognize. He saw a problem to be managed, a property to be liquidated. He no longer saw his father, he saw an obstacle. He misinterpreted my silence as acquiescence, a sign of weary defeat. A flicker of relief crossed his face. He had rehearsed this conversation, steeled himself for a fight, and was pleased by my apparent surrender. "The market is incredible right now, Dad," he pressed on, his voice shifting from feigned concern to the brisk, confident tone of the financial advisor he was. "I've already spoken to a developer, a very serious one. They're willing to make an offer, a very generous one that would set you up for life. No more worries, ever. You could travel or simplify." Simplify, he used that word again, as if my life, with its rich tapestry of memories and love woven into the very walls of this house, was a complicated equation that needed to be reduced to its simplest form. They wanted to erase it, tear it down, and build something new and sterile in its place. They wanted to tear me down. The pain was a physical thing, a cold weight settling in my chest. For a moment, it felt worse than the grief, worse than the loneliness. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The hours after Mark left were the longest I'd endured in a long time. The brochure for Golden Sunset Meadows remained on the table, a monument to my son's intentions. I couldn't bring myself to touch it, let alone throw it away. It felt like evidence of a crime, and in a way it was. The crime of a son trying to willfully erase his own history. I walked through the quiet rooms, my hand trailing along the cool plaster of the walls. Every corner held a memory of Aliner. In the kitchen, I could almost see her, dusted with flour, humming as she kneaded dough on the butcher block we'd found at a flea market. In the study, her favorite armchair sat empty by the fireplace, the indentation on the cushion still vaguely holding her shape. This house wasn't just wood and nails, it was a vessel for our life together. It was the last, most tangible piece of her I had left. The thought of it being bulldozed, reduced to a pile of splintered wood and broken memories to make way for a block of soulless luxury condos, was unbearable. It felt like a second death. That evening the phone rang, its shrill cry cutting through the oppressive silence. I knew it was Mark. "Dad, you okay?" he asked. There was no real warmth in his voice, just a perfunctory checking of a box. He delivered the bad news, now he was managing the fallout. "I'm the same as I was this afternoon, Mark," I replied, my voice flat. "Look, I know this is a lot to take in," he said, the practiced sympathy returning. "But the developer is really eager. He wants to walk the property on Friday. That's in 2 days. He's ready to move fast, which is good for us. A quick close means the money is in your account that much sooner." "Your account," he said, but I knew the money wouldn't stay there for long. It would be invested, funneled into Mark's failing startup, or used to fund the lavish lifestyle Jessica so desperately craved. The generational wealth I had carefully built, not for myself, but for him and his future, was being treated like a lottery ticket he was impatient to cash. "He wants to see it on Friday?" I asked, my mind starting to churn. An idea, faint and unformed, began to flicker in the back of my mind. "Yeah, Friday at 2 o'clock. Is that okay? You'll need to be there just to sort of hand over the keys symbolically. It looks good. Shows we're all on the same page." He wanted me to perform my own surrender, to stand there and smile while a stranger appraised the value of my life's demolition. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. "I'll have to see, Mark. I don't know if I'll be up to it." A beat of frustrated silence on the other end. "Dad, don't be difficult. This is a huge opportunity. You just have to show up. I'll handle everything else." I looked over at the mantelpiece, at the framed photo of Alina and me on the day we bought this house 35 years ago. We were young, broke, and foolishly optimistic, standing in front of a dilapidated structure that everyone else said was a teardown. But we saw its bones. We saw its soul. We poured our youth into its revival. In that moment, looking at Alina's smiling face, the flicker of an idea in my mind ignited into a steady, burning flame. Mark and Jessica saw me as a feeble old man lost in grief and easily managed. They saw a widower, a retired professor, a relic of a bygone era. They thought my quiet nature was weakness. They thought my love for this house was sentimental foolishness. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who I was. "Don't worry, son," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "I'll be here on Friday. I wouldn't miss it for the world." The line that hung in the air after he hung up was not one of defeat but one of promise. They had made their move. Now it was my turn. To understand what this house means, you have to understand Alina. She was the architect of our lives, and this house was her masterpiece. When we first found it, it was a wreck. The porch sagged, the paint was peeling in long, leprous strips, and the garden was a jungle of thorns and weeds. The realtor tried to steer us away, muttering about foundation issues and a money pit. But Alina walked through the dusty rooms, her eyes shining, and saw not what it was, but what it could be. "It has good bones, Sam," she had whispered, tracing the outline of a boarded-up window. "You just have to be willing to listen to what it wants to be." And so we listened. For the next 35 years, this house was our shared project, our passion. I was a history professor specializing in local architectural history, and Alina had an artist's soul. It was a perfect match. We spent our weekends stripping paint, sanding floors, and scouring salvage yards for period-correct fixtures. I'd researched the original 1890s design, finding old photographs at the town archive, and Alina would bring those photos to life. She chose the colors, planted the garden, and filled the rooms with a warmth that was a direct extension of her own heart. Mark grew up in the middle of this loving restoration. He held paintbrushes with his chubby toddler hands. He learned to count by counting nails. The house was his PL. I ground his fortress, his home, or so I thought. The change in him started slowly, around the time he met Jessica. Jessica was sleek and ambitious, a woman who measured the world in square footage and stock options. She worked in marketing, and her own life was a carefully curated brand of success. From the beginning, she viewed our home not as a place of love and history, but as an outdated liability. I remember one Sunday dinner, a few years after they were married. Jessica was admiring a new minimalist monstrosity a friend of hers had just built. "It's just so clean," she'd said, taking a delicate sip of her wine. "No clutter, everything is automated. You press a button and the blinds go down, so simple." She glanced around our dining room, at the antique Welsh dresser filled with Alina's mismatched china, at the scuffed wooden floors we'd refused to varnish to a perfect shine because we loved the imperfections. Her expression was one of polite pity. "This place must take so much work," she'd added, directing the comment at me but looking at Mark. All this dusting, and the heating bills in the winter I can't even imagine. Mark, who once loved the creak of the old floorboards, just nodded. Jess is right, Dad, it's a lot. Maybe we should hire a service to help you out. It wasn't an offer of help, it was an indictment. They saw the house as a collection of flaws, of inefficiencies, of problems to be solved. They didn't hear the stories the walls told. They didn't see the patch of plaster by the back door where Alina and I had etched our initials on our 10th anniversary. They saw an aging asset with poor insulation. After Alina passed, their subtle suggestions became a more overt campaign. "You must be so lonely rattling around in this big old house, Dad," Mark would say during his increasingly infrequent visits. Jessica would chime in, "A condo would be so much more practical. Think of the amenities, a pool, a gym, you wouldn't have to lift a finger." They spoke of it as a foregone conclusion, a gentle but firm slide toward the inevitable. My grief, they believed, had weakened me, made me more pliable. They saw my quiet retirement not as a time of peace and reflection, but as a state of decay. The retired history professor, now a piece of history himself, ready to be archived. The brochure for Golden Sunset Meadows wasn't the beginning of their plan, it was the culmination. It was the final dismissive gesture that told me they had given up on persuasion and were moving on to brute force. They weren't just trying to get me to sell a house. They were trying to sever my last connection to my wife, to erase the legacy we had built together, all for a developer's check. They saw a doddering old man who needed to be put out to pasture. They had no idea that a history professor, especially one who has spent his life studying strategy and precedent, knows that the quietest moves are often the most devastating. The turning point didn't happen after Mark's ultimatum. It had happened 6 months earlier, on a crisp autumn afternoon. Mark had called, his voice unusually breezy, to talk about his portfolio. He prattled on about market trends and bullish forecasts before casually dropping the line that set everything in motion. "You know, Dad, the property taxes on your place are just insane. We were looking at the appreciation on that land. It's a gold mine. A literal gold mine." It was the way he said that land, as if the house itself were an irrelevant shack sitting on a valuable lot. Not a home, not our home, just land. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the study, Alina's empty armchair mocking me from across the room, and I understood. This wasn't a passing thought for him. It was a plan in its infancy. I knew then that I had to act not out of spite, but out of a fierce, desperate need to protect the life Alina and I had built. My mind, accustomed to navigating the dusty labyrinth of historical archives, shifted from grieving widower to active strategist. I was a history professor. My entire career had been about preservation, about understanding the value of the past and ensuring it survived into the future. And this house, our house, was a significant piece of local history. The original owner, a ship captain named Elias Thorne, had been a prominent figure in our town's founding. The unique gingerbread trim on the gables was one of the last remaining examples of its kind in the state. The next morning I made a phone call, not to a lawyer, not yet. I called a former student of mine, a bright young woman named Sarah, who was now the head of the County Historical Preservation Society. "Professor Samuel," she'd exclaimed, her voice warm with genuine affection. "How have you been? I was just citing your monograph on 19th century port architecture last week." We spoke for a while, catching up, before I steered the conversation to my true purpose. I explained my situation. Not with the emotional plea of a desperate father, but with the calm, factual tone of a fellow academic. I laid out the historical bona fides of my house, the Thorne connection, the architectural significance, its role as a social hub in the early 20th century. I sent her my own private research, complete with photographs and sourced documents. Sarah was intrigued. "Sam, this is incredible," she said a few days later after reviewing my files. "You're not just living in a house, you're living in an artifact. Why have you never applied for landmark status before?" "It was always a private thing for Alina and me," I admitted. "We never felt the need for a plaque on the wall to tell us it was special." "Well," she said, her voice firming with purpose, "I think it's time we made it official." The process was my secret project for the next several months. It gave me a sense of purpose that had been missing since Alina's death. While Mark and Jessica were plotting my simplified future in a sterile room, I was engaged in a complex, multi-layered campaign of my own. There were forms to file, architectural surveys to be conducted, and a board meeting to attend. I met with the Society's board in the town's old library, presenting my case with the same passion I had once reserved for my university lectures. I told them the story of the house, of Alina, of our 35-year restoration. I didn't mention my son or his plans. This wasn't about him. This was about the house. The board voted unanimously to grant the house protected landmark status. It was a victory, but I knew it wasn't enough. A determined developer with a slick lawyer could still find loopholes, ways to challenge the designation. I needed an iron wall. I needed to take the property off the table entirely. That's when I took the final, irreversible step. I met with a lawyer, my own lawyer, a shrewd, quiet man named Arthur who had handled our estate planning for years. I explained the situation and he laid out the options. The most decisive one was also the most radical. "You can transfer the deeds, Sam," he'd said, peering at me over his spectacles. "Donate the property to the Historical Society. You can do it with a lifetime estate clause, which means they own it, but you have the legal right to live here as its steward until you pass. Once the deed is in their name, no developer, no bank, and no family member can touch it. It will be protected in perpetuity." To give away my house. The thought was terrifying. It was everything a leaner and I had ever owned. But then I realized I wasn't giving it away. I was giving it a future. I was entrusting it to people who saw it the way we did. So 6 weeks before Mark ever walked in with that brochure, I signed the papers. The deed to my home was transferred to the County Historical Preservation Society. My trap wasn't just a plan, it was a legal and binding reality. All that was left was to let my son walk into it. When Mark showed up on that fateful afternoon with the brochure, I was ready. As he delivered his well-rehearsed speech about my well-being and the incredible market, I let him talk. I watched the earnest, concerned expression he had plastered on his face and felt a profound sense of sorrow. He was performing a role, trying to convince himself as much as me that this act of avarice was actually an act of love. Instead of arguing, instead of showing him the fury and hurt that churned in my gut, I did the last thing he expected. I gave him a small, weary smile. "You're right, Mark," I said softly. He blinked, taken aback. "I am." "Yes," I said, nodding slowly. I looked around the room at the life Alina and I had built, and I let a single, genuine tear trace a path down my cheek. It wasn't entirely for show. The grief was real. It is a lot, and I am tired. Maybe simplifying is the right thing to do. The relief that washed over his face was so potent it was almost comical. He had come armed for a siege and found the city gates wide open. He practically sagged back into the sofa cushions. "Oh, Dad," he said, his voice thick with false emotion. "I'm so glad you understand. This is for the best, you'll see." "So the developer is coming Friday?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. I was a better actor than I thought. "Yes, Friday at 2. Don't you worry about a thing. I'll be here to handle all the details. You just be ready." I nodded again. "I should probably start packing a few things then," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Just the essentials for the new place." I gestured toward the Golden Sunset Meadows brochure. Mark's smile was blinding. He had won. He had gotten everything he wanted without a fight. His dear old dad had folded, just as he and Jessica had predicted. "That's a great idea, Dad," he said, standing up, suddenly eager to leave before I could change my mind. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a brand thaw. "And a comfort, you're doing the right thing. This is going to be a new beginning for you." After he left, I didn't go to pack a suitcase. I went to the phone and called Sarah at the Historical Society. "It's happening, Sarah," I said. "My son is bringing the developer on Friday at 2 o'clock to view the property." There was a pause on the other end, and then I heard the rustle of papers. "Friday at 2, perfect," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "The installation team was already scheduled for Friday afternoon. We can have them arrive at, say, 2:15. I can be there myself to supervise." "That would be perfect, Sarah, thank you." "No, Sam," she said, her voice softening. "Thank you, you're saving a piece of history." For the next 2 days, I played the part of the defeated old man. When Mark called to confirm the time, I sounded fragile and resigned. I told him I'd started packing a small suitcase with some books and photographs, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. He was so sure of himself, so confident in his victory, that he never once stopped to question it. He was a financial advisor who prided himself on due diligence, yet he had failed to do the most basic research on the single biggest asset he was trying to liquidate. He had been so blinded by greed that he couldn't see the truth right in front of him. He had forgotten that history, my field of expertise, is all about the details, and I had made sure every last detail was in its proper place. Thursday night, the eve of the developer's visit, felt like the calm before a storm. The house was quieter than ever, holding its breath. I spent the evening not in a panic, but in quiet reflection. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Alina's armchair, the worn fabric a comforting presence. My case wasn't something I was building, it was already built, signed, and sealed. The deed was filed at the county records office, a public document for anyone to see, but Mark had never thought to look. Why would he? In his mind, the house was already his to sell. The phone rang around 9 o'clock. It was Mark, his voice buzzing with an energy I hadn't heard since he was a teenager who'd just gotten his driver's license. Dad just wanted to check in, all set for tomorrow. As I'll ever be, I said truthfully. Great, great, he chirped. Listen, I was just on the phone with Mr. Harrison, that's the developer. He's even more excited than I thought. He said depending on how tomorrow goes, he's prepared to write an offer on the spot. A really, really good one. We're talking top of the market, Dad, life-changing money. He was practically giddy. I could picture him pacing his minimalist gray and white living room, Jessica watching him with an approving gleam in her eyes. They were counting the money already, spending it in their minds. A new car for her, a capital injection for his business, a life unburdened by the inconvenient existence of his old father and his old house. That's nice, Mark, I said. Nice, Dad, it's incredible, this is it. This is the fresh start we've been talking about. For you, he added a little too quickly. This is for you. A wave of profound sadness washed over me. He wasn't a monster, he was my son, but he was lost. He had bought into a version of the world where legacy was measured in dollars and sentiment was a foolish liability. He was so focused on the future he was trying to build that he was willing to bulldoze the past, his own past, to lay the foundation. I thought of Alina, of a promise I had made to her in this very room just a few weeks before she passed. Her body was failing, but her mind was as sharp as ever. She held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Don't let them ever take this house, Sam, she had whispered, her eyes fixed on the garden beyond the window. It's not for us anymore, it's for everyone who comes after, it's a story. Don't let them tear out the pages. I had promised her I wouldn't, and tomorrow I would make good on that promise. Well, Mark, I said, my voice steady and calm, I trust you to handle it, you always were good with numbers. That's my boy, he said, misinterpreting my words as a statement of pride. You just sit back and relax. By tomorrow afternoon, all your worries will be over. I'm sure they will be, I said, and for the first time in our conversation, every word I spoke was the absolute, unvarnished truth. I hung up the phone and looked at Alina's picture on the mantel. Her smile seemed to give me all the strength I needed. The stakes were no longer just about a house. This was about my promise to her. This was about the very definition of family. The case was closed. Now all that remained was for the verdict to be delivered. Friday arrived, a bright, deceptively cheerful summer day. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. At 1:30, I packed a small overnight bag just as I'd told Mark I would. I placed a few books, a hinge of clothes, and the framed photo of Alina and me inside. It was my only prop, a small piece of theater for the final act. I placed the bag by the front door, a silent testament to my supposed surrender. At precisely 2 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Mark got out of the passenger side, smoothing down his suit. He looked triumphant. The driver's door opened and a man in his late 60s emerged. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a mane of silver hair and the confident, predatory air of a man who was used to getting exactly what he wanted. This had to be Mr. Harrison, the developer. I watched from the bay window as Mark greeted him with a handshake that was both deferential and conspiratorial. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, Harrison's gaze sweeping over the house with a cold, appraising eye. He wasn't looking at the intricate woodwork or the stained glass transom window above the door. He was calculating demolition costs and lot size. Mark led him up the front walk, pointing out the breadth of the property, the mature oak tree in the yard, likely seeing it not as a century-old marvel, but as a nuisance to be removed. My son was selling off his own childhood piece by piece. I opened the door before they had a chance to knock. Dad, Mark said, beaming, this is Mr. Harrison, my father, Samuel. A pleasure, Harrison said, his handshake firm and dry. His eyes flickered past me into the hallway. A lot of potential here, a lot of land. We think so too, Mark said eagerly. Dad finally decided it's time to simplify. He's ready to move on to the next chapter. He gestured meaningfully at the suitcase by the door. Harrison nodded, a slight approving smile on his lips. The seller was motivated, the deal was clean, this would be easy. For the next 10 minutes, I followed them like a ghost as they walked through the ground floor. Mark did all the talking, his voice a river of sales speak. Original hardwood, of course, but you'd be taking it down to the studs anyway. The foundation is solid, a great base to build on. Imagine a row of townhouses right here with a view of the park. Mr. Harrison just grunted in response, his expert eye seeing through walls and floors to the valuable earth beneath. They didn't go upstairs. They didn't need to. The house itself was an irrelevance. Finally, they moved back outside to the front lawn to discuss the real business at hand, the numbers. This was my cue. I remained in the doorway watching. So as you can see, it's the best lot on the street, Mark was saying, his hands spread wide. Unobstructed, ready to go. And just as he said the words, ready to go, a white panel van turned the corner and pulled up directly in front of the house. On its side, in elegant navy blue lettering, were the words, County Historical Preservation Society. Mark paused, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. What's this? The side door of the van slid open. A woman with a clipboard and a warm, professional smile stepped out. It was Sarah. Behind her, two men in work uniforms carefully unloaded a large, flat object wrapped in a blanket and a toolbox. Good afternoon, Sarah called out, walking confidently up the path. She smiled at me. Samuel, hello, I hope we're not interrupting anything. Mark's face was a canvas of confusion. Dad, who is this? Before I could answer, Sarah turned her bright smile on him and Mr. Harrison. Sarah Jenkins, director of the Historical Society, she said, extending a hand to Harrison, who took it hesitantly. And you must be Mr. Harrison. I've heard about your work. One of the workmen came up behind her, holding the object from the van. He unwrapped it, revealing a heavy, solid bronze plaque. The afternoon sun glinted off the raised letters. Mr. Harrison squinted, reading the text aloud in a flat, disbelieving monotone. The Elias Thorne House, circa 1892. This property has been designated a protected historic landmark and is preserved in perpetuity for its significant contribution to our town's architectural heritage. He looked from the plaque to me, then to a horrified-looking Mark, and then back to the plaque. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Mark finally found his voice. It was a choked, strangled sound. What is this, Dad? What is this? It's a joke, right? No joke, Mark, I said calmly. Sarah addressed Mr. Harrison directly. The deed for this property was transferred to the Historical Society 6 weeks ago, she explained, her tone pleasant but firm. As a protected landmark, any alteration to the structure, let alone its demolition, is strictly forbidden by county and state law. We're just here today to install the official marker. Harrison's face, which had been a mask of cool confidence, turned a dark, mottled red. He shot a look of pure venom at Mark. You brought me out here for this. You told me this property was clear. You wasted my time. I didn't know, Mark stammered, turning to me, his eyes wide with panic and dawning comprehension. Dad, you gave it away, the house, our house. I didn't give it away, son, I said, my voice finally finding its full strength. I saved it, just like I promised your mother I would. Harrison didn't wait for the rest of the family drama. He turned on his heel without another word, marched back to his car, and sped away, leaving a stunned and humiliated Mark standing alone on the lawn. The workmen, meanwhile, began drilling pilot holes next to the front door, the sound of their tools a rhythmic, definitive punctuation to the end of my son's greedy ambitions. The plaque was going up. The house was safe. The battle was over. The immediate aftermath was a blur of righteous activity. The workmen installed the bronze plaque with quiet efficiency, its metallic sheen a permanent shield against future threats. Sarah gave my shoulder a supportive squeeze, her job done, and left me with a simple, call if you need anything, Sam. Mark stood frozen on the lawn, his face pale, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. The developer's car was long gone. The dream of a quick, massive payday had vanished in the space of 5 minutes. He stared at the plaque, then at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and raw fury. How could you, he finally whispered, his voice cracking, how could you do this to me, to us? This wasn't done to you, Mark, I said, my voice tired but steady. This was done for the house, for your mother's memory. You left me no other choice. No choice, I was trying to help you. I was trying to secure your future, he shouted, his voice rising with hysteria. My future was already secure right here, I replied, gesturing to the house around us. You were trying to secure your future at the expense of my past, at the expense of our past. He just shook his head, unable to process it. He stumbled back to his own car and drove away, the squeal of his tires the only sound in the quiet afternoon. That evening the angry phone calls began. First, it was Mark, ranting about lawyers and contesting my competence. I let him yell until he ran out of breath, and then I calmly told him to have his lawyer call mine. The transfer is ironclad, Mark. It's a matter of public record. Next came Jessica. Her voice was ice. I hope you're happy, Samuel. You've ruined everything. Mark's reputation, our financial plans, all because you couldn't let go of some old, dusty house. This old, dusty house paid for your husband's education, Jessica, I said, my patience finally snapping. It was the collateral for the loan that started his first business. It has given your family everything. I simply decided it was time it stopped giving. I hung up before she could reply. A week later, a humbled Mark appeared on my doorstep. His lawyer had, as expected, confirmed the bitter truth. The house was untouchable. He looked smaller, deflated. The slick confidence was gone, replaced by a sullen confusion. We sat in the living room, the Golden Sunset Meadows brochure long since dispatched to the recycling bin. I don't understand, Dad, he said, looking at the floor. Why not just tell me no? Because no wouldn't have been enough, I explained patiently. You and Jessica would have kept pushing. You would have tried to have me declared incompetent. You would have worn me down. You saw my love for this place as a weakness to be exploited, not a boundary to be respected. I had to take it off the board entirely. I had to protect it from you. He flinched at the bluntness of my words. For a long time, he was silent. He looked around the room, really looked, perhaps for the first time in years. His eyes lingered on the pencil marks on the doorframe. Mom loved this house so much, he said quietly. Yes, I said she did. It wasn't a magic fix. Our relationship was fractured, scarred by his greed and my deception, however necessary. But it was a start. It was the first honest moment we had shared in years. He left that day with a quiet, "I'm sorry, Dad." I don't know if he was sorry for what he did or just sorry he got caught. Maybe in time he'll understand the difference. My life is quiet now, but it is not lonely. I am the official steward of the Elia's Thorn House. I give occasional tour to school groups and history buffs. I spend my afternoons in the garden tending to Alina's roses. I have fulfilled my promise to her. The house is safe, its story preserved for generations to come. Sometimes in the late afternoon I go out and polish the bronze plaque by the door. I run my hand over the cool, raised letters and feel a profound sense of peace. I didn't just save a building, I saved my own soul. I had been forced to choose between my son's future and his mother's legacy. I chose legacy. And in doing so, I finally found my way back to myself.